July 25th, 2023. My name is Donna Rich Stewart, and I'm with the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, Conejo Valley, California chapter, and also with the Kia Chase chapter of Colonial Dames 17th Century. It's my distinct honor to interview Mr. Forrest L. Frields for the Veterans History Project sponsored by the Library of Congress. This interview is being recorded today by Mr. K. Edward Lynch of Advanta Videography and contains the veterans' accounts and recollections of his service with the United States Army. This is Forrest's story.
Today is July 25th, 2023. I'm honored to introduce Mr. Forrest L. Frields, Distinguished Veteran of the United States Army. Good morning. Thank you for contributing to this Library of Congress program to record firsthand stories from America's war veterans for the Veterans History Project. You were born in San Antonio, Texas, to Rupert Jesse Frields and Hallie Veronica Owen. Your father was born in 1914 and was a pharmacist in England during the World War II, and sadly died at the age of 49. Your mother lived a long life, however, passing at age 85. You were the youngest of 3 children of this union. Your older sisters were Paula, who recently passed at age 76, and Mary, who lives in Texas. You were active in the junior ROTC all through high school and junior college and graduated from St. Mary's University in 1966 with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. As an ROTC graduate, you joined the U.S. Army in July 1966 as a second lieutenant artillery. Please tell us about your training and your first tour of Vietnam.
Well, I opted to let go of artillery and become an aviator, and the Army started my aviation training and learning how to fly a fixed-wing aircraft, the Cessna 172, while I was a junior in college, and so I would have a class at university and then drive like mad around the city to get to the airport, and then fly for an hour, and then come back for a lab or something else like that. So I learned to fly at an early stage of my military career, and that's when my adventures began. Because one day, after not having flown for several weeks because of ground school training, I was out with my instructor pilot, and I was asked to do a climbing turn stall to the right. And what that involves is turning the yoke, pulling it back as far as you can go, and the aircraft tends to go up, up, and up, and up, and it starts to shake, and then the high wing breaks and goes down and starts to spin. And you initiate it, so you're expecting it, so you know how to recover from it. Well, as I was pulling that yoke back, a plastic yoke, it broke off in my hands, and the rod that controls the aircraft slammed into the dashboard. My instructor pilot happened to have his hand in a leather strap up here, couldn't get his hand out of the strap. So there was a bolt left on the rod from where the yoke had broken off. I reached in and grabbed the screw bolt, and pulled it back and leveled the aircraft off straight and level again. Well, so by this time he had his hand out of the strap, and so he was flying now. So he flew back to the airport. We weren't that far away. We landed and rolled over to our parking area, and he told me, get out, get back in on the other side, and go do 5 touch and goes. Touch and go is you tell the tower what you're going to do. You come in and you touch down, you roll, and then you take back off, all in one maneuver. Go do 5 touch and goes. And I never had done a touch and go or any kind of flying from that side of the. So the important thing about that is when I'm flying where I'm supposed to be, my right hand controlled the throttle. When I was over there, now my left hand had to control the throttle, and I felt like a fish out of water. But I successfully did it, and did the 5 touch and goes, came in, landed, taxied over to our parking area, got out of the aircraft, and as I was walking to the office, one of the other students that I knew was coming to fly his turn. As I reached in my pocket to get a cigarette out, I was shaking so bad I ripped the pocket off of my shirt. And he said, "What's going on with you?" And I told him, and he said, "Wow." And we took it from there. So that was my first adventure, and I didn't have any inkling that I was going to have a lot more before it was all over. And so when I graduated, I was commissioned a second lieutenant artillery. I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where the artillery school is. I taught artillery for advanced individual training called AIT. I taught troops that had already been through basic. I taught them how to use artillery, those who were going to be in the artillery, for 9 months. 9 months. And I only set the grass on fire in the range once or twice. My fault. I learned that too, by the way. But so once I got my orders, I knew there had been some drastic mistake when it said I was going to helicopter school, rotary wing they called it, but I was a fixed wing pilot. What do you mean I have to fly helicopters? Well, I was wrong. I was going to fly helicopters. And so I got married. That'll teach me. But I got married, and the two of us went to Fort Walters, Texas, for the first 4 months of primary helicopter school, and then from there to Fort Rucker, Alabama, for the second 4 months of helicopter school, and following that to Vietnam for my first tour. And so I got in Vietnam in November 4, 1967, 2 days before my 25th anniversary, my 25th birthday. And I've got a story that down the road, well, I'll tell you, I got to Vietnam after a 22-hour cramped plane flight, and we arrived in I think it was Saigon at midnight. And I do remember exiting the aircraft, which had been air conditioned. There was no meals, I don't believe. I think there was coffee, and that was about it. But as I stepped out of the aircraft, not into a tunnel like we use nowadays, but staircase going down to the ground, and that hot, humid, smelly air of Vietnam, right in the face. And I thought, boy, this is no foreign country now. We're in a different place and totally different. Well, we in processed, and you may not realize it, but in a combat situation like we experienced there in Vietnam, we didn't use American money. We used military money. It looked like monopoly money. It was a smaller bill and elaborately printed and so forth. And it was called Military Payment Certificate, MPC for short. And so the first thing you do when you get off the airplane is you go through a line and they ask you, how much money do you have? And I said, well, I've got $200. Well, give us the $200 in greenbacks and I'll give you $200 in MPC. And somehow that's supposed to stop the enemy from draining gold out of our system back in Washington, D.C. So we use military payment certificates, which were changed. The color of them was changed every year on a snap notice, so that there was no time to prepare. All of a sudden, everything locked down, and you changed from a green MPC bill to a yellow one, and the green were worthless. So, and there was usually $1 million or more, I'm told, that had infiltrated into the Vietnamese economy illegally, and so it was all worthless now. And now the yellow version was what was going to be paid, and so we had to learn that MPC, 100 MPC was $100, but in Vietnam, I think the exchange rate was 115 or something like that to the dollar. It didn't make any. The Vietnamese wanted to even money. If you had $1, it was $1, whatever it was. And so we went through and we processed, and we got jungle boots and jungle fatigues and caps, and got rid of our khaki uniforms, and anything else we had went into storage that I got back when I went home a year later. But so we had fatigues and new boots, and sent to a 10-man tent to spend the night, the rest of the night. And it was pretty close to dawn to begin with. And then the next morning, we lined up to be given our further orders to go where we're going to go once we arrived in Vietnam. The orders we all carried were to get to that processing place in Saigon, and then from there we were reassigned to the units that needed us. And so I have a story, a war story, about that, of course. And so I walked up to a curtain. I mean, I was standing. We were all lined up out in the sun, and there was a building, and there were a couple of clerks there with no shirts on, of course, and smoking cigarettes in it, manual typewriter. And so you'd give them your orders, and they'd look at your orders and say, "Okay, oh, so you're an aviator." Say, "I'm an aviator." So he would turn to his partner and say, "This is a pilot. Where are we going to send this guy?" And I'm thinking, I'm only a second lieutenant, but I don't think they're supposed to call me Guy. I think they're supposed to call me Sir. But I was wrong. They called me Guy. And so one of them said, what's his MOS, military occupational specialty? He said, he's a pilot. Oh, well, why don't you send him to the first cav? They always need pilots. And I thought, well, I'm not so sure that's good news, but okay, the first cav. And I've got a hat that says I was in the first cav. And so they said, well, how do I get to the first cav? They said, well, go sit out there on the runway, and helicopter will come in and somebody will tell you. Well, a helicopter didn't come in, but a C-130 did. And he said, all you boys that are going to the first cab, get on and have a seat. There were no seats. We sat on the floor in the bottom of the aircraft. Took off, and they took us to An Khie, which is where the first cab had its rear area from Vietnam. So we landed at An Khie at a place called Marble Mountain, and that's where the first cab did everything, and then they sent troops out into the area as needed. Well, where am I going to be assigned? So they said, there was a couple of clerks sitting there also, and they let me see your orders, and they said, well, we've got a pilot here. Where we want to send him? He asked his partner, and the guy said, well, a pilot. Did you have gun training? No, I didn't have gun training. They meant gunship. And I said, no, I didn't have that. And they said, well, send him to the 1st of the 9th. They always need pilots. This is the second time I've heard that. I'm pretty sure it's not a good news. So I said, well, where's the 1st of the 9th? He said, well, you walk down this dirt road until you find a Jeep that's upside down. Take a right. And you'll see some hooches. They don't call them huts like normal people. They call them hooches. They got some hooches there, and the first one will be the first. Okay, so that was the rear area for the 1st of the 9th. So I go over there, and there's a couple of pilots sitting there, and they're going on R&R. And then they don't care much about anything. And say, oh, you knew, huh? Yeah, okay. Where did they assign you? I said, well, the 1st of the 9th. And they said they always need pilots. And he said, oh, yeah, we always need pilots. That's good. How do I get there? And they said, well, there'll be a ship in here shortly. Just have a seat, and they'll call you a helicopter. And a little while later, they left, and so I'm kind of sitting there, and a helicopter lands over there. And they said, anybody going to the 1st of the 9th? And I said, yeah, I'm here. I got in the helicopter. We took off. So now I'm flying over rice paddies and jungle and all that kind of neat stuff. And there's some of the most beautiful mountains over on my left that I've ever seen. And I see ocean, the South China Sea on the other side. And so we're flying out along Highway 1, the street without joy, named by the French. And so pretty soon we come to a little mound of dirt and surrounded by rice paddies, and that was LZ 2-bits, 2-bits south. There's a 2-bits north. There's another mound over there and a mound here, and it's got a lot of helicopters on it and tents. That was 1st of the 9th. It was 1st of the 9th Charlie Troop. And when I got there, I said, I'm supposed to be a Charlie Troop 1st of the 9th. They said, well, this is what this is. He said, you have orders? Yes, I do. And they looked, they said, oh, where are we going to send this pilot? He's a pilot, new pilot. And the guy says, oh, why don't you send him? Did you have gun training? No, I didn't have gun training. They always ask. And they said, well, send him to Scouts. They always need pilots. And by this time, I'm pretty sure that they always need pilots is not a good thing. And so I asked them, I said, why do they always need pilots? I said, because they get shot down. Oh, all right. Where do I go from here? Where's the scout? He said, well, I'll go to that tent over there, and the platoon leader will be back. He's flying now, but he'll be back in a little while, and he'll assign you. I said, okay. So I went over there, and I waited and waited, and next thing I know, in came my platoon leader, and they were referring to him as white. Well, is this racist? Or what? No, I didn't even think that. But he was white, and come to find out, in most cavalry units, and there were several in Vietnam, white is a scout. That's a radio call sign, white. That's the type of aircraft, and that's the aircraft that you see on the far left up there with the tail booms open up. That's a white ship, and it's a scout. And then you were assigned a number besides. So white was the kind of ship you were flying, and then the number was you. I was 1-1. Not 11, 1-1, 2 ones. And so I get over there and say, well, here I am. And he said, well, did you fly guns? And no, I didn't. I just learned to fly fixed wing, and I'm a fixed wing pilot, but I went to rotary wing flight. He said, we'll teach you. And so sure enough, the next week I learned to fly that helicopter on the far left up there as a scout. Well, come to find out, I'm very proud of being a scout. I flew scouts for 9 months, and I survived all of that. I got shot down one time. I crashed my ship one time, my fault. I investigated aircraft accidents as a second lieutenant, and I did a good job because I got more of those kinds of assignments, and I wound up being a safety officer in my second tour. And so, brand new, I'm just learning to fly the aircraft, although I had flown similar models in flight school, so I was pretty comfortable in it. And they said, you know, our blue platoon is going to be going through a village. Found out that there's an infantry platoon assigned to every cavalry outfit, and that infantry platoon, it's not there to give them somebody to go on KP or to stand guard duty. It's there to recover lost aircraft and the pilots that were in them, because the Army knew from the get-go that we were going to get shot down, and so they're giving us a way to get out. Well, I was shot down one time. I didn't have to hit the ground. I managed to fly it back, but they threw away the airplane. It was gone. But and that's another story. But when I went out my first time in Vietnam in the aircraft that I was going to be flying, I didn't fly it. I went along as the gunner. Well, I knew how to use a machine gun, and so they handed me a machine gun, and I said, oh yeah, I've only shot this in practice. And they said, well, you just pull the trigger and it does the rest. I said, okay. And so I'm sitting over there on the right side, and the pilot's over on the left side. He's a young warrant officer that knew what he was doing. And so our blue platoon, the ships that carried them were called blue, and the pilots that flew them had their own number, just like I did. And so whenever there was a radio call, it was blue 77 or White 1-1, that was me. We knew the kind of ship we were talking to, and we knew the pilot, because we had gunships as well as scout ships, as well as Hueys that were just universal ships for just about everything. But their main job was to carry the blues, the blue platoon that was our infantry platoon. And so they were on the ground, they were going through a village and just investigating it, looking for bad guys. And so I was in a scout ship, and I was flying as the door gunner, and we were just making circles and circles, low level across around the village as the troops were walking through. And of course, about halfway through, I was so airsick, I didn't care if they found anything or not. I wasn't going to be of any help to them. But I managed. They didn't find anything, and I managed to make it without throwing up. Back to base, landed. That was the only time I ever got airsick. But I had door gunners that got airsick, and I only gave them one command: get it outside the ship, because we never flew with doors on our ships. And then, as you can see on those little ships, there's just a bubble and a couple of seats, and that's it. And so I flew that for maybe 4 or 5 months, and then we changed to the smallest little ship that you see up there, and that's the Loach, the OH-6 Alpha. And it was a vast improvement over what I had flown in before. In my first scout ship, I had occasion to find a number of enemy Viet Cong. We're in black pajamas, bamboo hats. We were flying in the central highlands of Vietnam, and very mountainous in valleys. And so needless to say, the bad guys were pretty much everywhere in small numbers. And so my job as a scout was to find them. And so we would be given an area to look in, and two ships, always two ships, would send us out to go into recon in that area and to report. We didn't see anything, that's good. Or we saw something, we attacked it, we won, or we brought in other assets, artillery, gunships, TAC air, and I think our photographer knows what TAC air is, with bombs and napalm. We had everything at our beck and call as a scout. And so all I had to do was find them. Well, as a scout, I got shot at probably at least once a week. And of course you don't hear anything. You got a helmet on, and you got rotor blades and an engine right behind us, and it's making a lot of racket. And of course the blades are making a lot of racket. So you don't hear gunshots, but you see muzzle flashes in a darkened jungle. So as a scout pilot, I flew the aircraft, and I had a youngster sitting next to me. I was the old guy at 25. I was the old guy. I'm going to fly with the old guy? Yeah, it's Forrest, yeah. And so these were young guys that were 18, 19, 20 years old. Everybody in the Army, it seemed to me, wanted to be a door gunner. They thought that was so cool. It was very cool when you flew at altitude. It was very cool. On the ground, it was steaming hot, but if you got up in the air 5,000-6,000 feet, it was very cool, very comfortable. And so, but you had a machine gun in front of you, and you could whoop it around as a door gunner. And they thought that's pretty cool stuff. Well, we were all volunteers to begin with, and our door gunners were usually people who had been in Vietnam for a while, maybe 6, 7, 8 months, and they were getting ready to leave, and they'd say, well, listen, I might want to stay longer if I could be a door gunner. And they'd say, you can be a door gunner, son, here, sign right here. And they would give them a bonus, and they would maybe send them on an R&R so they can forget about it. But when they came back, they would come to us. And as I said, we're all volunteers. At any given time, we could all just say, I quit. And they would send us into some other kind of outfit. And so the door gunners would come to us. And so it was our job to facilitate their job. And so they sit right next to me. There was a wooden box between the two, just a wooden box between the two of us, and it was filled with every kind of hand grenade that the Army made. Smoke, concussion, fragmentation, you name it, we had it. Tear gas even. And so we used them all for different kinds of things. And then the door gunner, he had an M60 machine gun, and then between his feet was another wooden box, and he had 1,000 rounds of belted ammunition. It was all hooked together, and it fed into the machine gun. He just held the machine gun in his lap. It wasn't on a stand or hanging, it's on his lap. So he, as we found out, he would regularly hang out the door of the aircraft, shooting underneath the aircraft, because that's where the bad guys were shooting at us, and he could see them. Well, I couldn't see him. All I could see was his reaction. He had a button on the floor that he could talk through the intercom to me, and we were constantly talking to one another, because he was looking over there and up, and I was looking over here and up, and because the up was because we oftentimes flew up mountains, and something bad could be up ahead of us. Well, I had a machine gun also, and it was mounted on the left skid of my helicopter, but all I could do was raise it up and down, and I had to turn the helicopter in order to get left and right. So I didn't use it, not much. I don't know if I ever used it in action, but it had 100 rounds of belted ammunition in it, same that my door gunner had. And so there were occasions where we got into gunfights. He would use up 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and yet I still had fuel. So we were still flying, and he'd say, I'm just about out of ammo. And so I could stretch and reach out with my hand and grab a hold of my ammunition, break it off, because it would come apart if you pulled it the right way. I could hand him another 100 rounds to get us out of the battle, whatever was going on. There were two identical ships with identical problems and armament, and we flew as a team. I was a team leader. He followed me. He was my chase ship. And we did missions day, night, evening is a better way to put it. And I did that for my first 9 months in country. I lost count of how many of the enemy I sent to enemy heaven, but it was a lot. I got in gunfights almost all the time. I was wounded in my leg once by the guy who shot us up so bad we threw away the aircraft. It was so full of bullet holes, and it shot off part of my gunner's foot, and he was shipped out. That was an experience for me, and that was after flying in the Central Highlands for that first 4 or 5 months. The Tet Offensive began, and that was the biggest battle of the war that whole year. And the first cab was sent north to I Corps at the DMZ, where the Marines were trapped in a fire base called Quezon. And there were a lot of Marines there. And they were surrounded by 40,000 NVA troops, the National Army of North Vietnam. These were professional troops that had been trained. They'd been to basic at least. And no more black pajamas. The Tet Offensive, the black pajamas were pushed in first by the NVA, and we wiped out the Viet Cong. I mean, we killed them all. They were used incorrectly, and from then on, after that first push in the Tet Offensive, I was fighting the NVA. So I fought two different types of enemy. One enemy that hid from us, and the other enemy that just used numbers to overwhelm 2 helicopters. So what I would run into then flying in I Corps during the Tet Offensive was I would find not one or two black pajamas. I would find 100, 200 men in the open, hiding in the jungle, trying to hide from me. And I was trying to find them. And once upon a time, flying back, I flew over a clearing and it had bamboo trees all around it. And there was a class going on for the NVA. They were lined up on fallen tree logs, like a classroom environment. And they had a tripod like we're using here. And they had a string and a little model helicopter, pretty rough one, on the string. And they were teaching people how to shoot at a helicopter with a machine gun, 51 caliber machine gun, which we dreaded because it would go right through everything we had. Well, I just reported it and just kept on going because I was low level. All of my work as a scout pilot started at maybe 5,000 feet. But when we got to the area that we needed to do a reconnaissance of, I dropped down to the treetops. And so I always flew at the treetops. That's where I always flew. And that's where I learned one of my lessons about life is you don't have to worry about all those trees down there. That they may have all sorts of bad things hidden from you that are looking for you. But you don't have to worry about them. All you have to worry about is that one tree that's higher than all the rest. And I learned that because there were two trees higher than all the rest. And I realized that too late. And so I had to turn completely sideways, which they said you can't do in a helicopter, and fly between those two palm trees without hitting anything. And I came out the other side, and the gunner, I remember him saying, "Wow, that was fun." I said, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, we won't do that anymore, though." But so that was a lesson I learned in life. You don't have to worry about everything. All you have to do is worry about that one thing that's higher than the rest, that's the closest to you. And they taught me that. I learned that when I was in ROTC. You didn't shoot the first guy in the line coming running at you. You shot the guy in the back. Because that way the guy in the front didn't know he was by himself. If you shot the guy in the front, the guys in the back would duck. Made good sense to me. I was just a student in high school, college. I'll try it. Well, we got into a lot of gunfights, and I tell you, we threw a lot of hand grenades. I got some valor awards for finding the enemy in caves and stuff like that, and literally eliminating them. But the flying was exemplary, and I'm very proud of the flying that I had to do in order to accomplish that. They weren't shooting back. But to start off with a war story about that is we're looking at a hill full of caves and caves formed by big boulders, and people were hiding in and around trying to get Viet Cong. And I came upon a cave. And of course, I was at low level, and I looked in at the same level as the cave. There was a cave entrance, and there were 3 Viet Cong troops in black pajamas with a little cooking fire in front of them, and their rifles were all stacked over there. And they had eyes about that big as they saw that helicopter looking at them. And I think their eyes were not me. I think their eyes were on the machine gun that was aimed at them. And so I was sitting at a hover. And these guys were deciding what to do. I was deciding what to do. They weren't shooting at me. And so on the radio, back to my base, the base back to the South Vietnamese, and they said, "We have no friendly troops in that area. We've removed all of the villagers that are willing to leave. And so anybody that's left there, they're in a free fire zone. If you find somebody, shoot them." That's a little harsh. And what about these 3 guys that I'm looking at? Kill them. We don't have any troops around that can come and capture them or any of that kind of thing. He said, kill them. And so I turned to my gunner through our intercom. I said, kill them. He killed them. Killed all three of them. And we continued on until we wiped out everyone we could find in that hill hiding. Sometimes with hand grenades, we dropped them into holes that we could see between boulders. And so not only was it a shooting war for us that we won, but it was a flying war because the winds would change. And I'm at a hovering many times, and the winds would shift. And all of a sudden, my helicopter would start to settle. It would literally do this, start to settle into the rocks. And I would have to break away, fly down the side of the little hill, pick up some airspeed, come back up, come back around, and come back down again and continue the cleanup mob. I was scared to death. I mean, that was my first heavy encounter. I was not shot at, but the flying that I had to do was something I had never experienced before. And I'm very proud of what I did. And you'll have to pardon me for sometimes becoming emotional. I have tremendous PTSD. Tremendous PTSD. Those 9 months that I flew scouts, I got enough combat to last me the rest of my life. And yet I had 3 more months to go in Vietnam. And then because I planned on staying in, I knew that I'd be back sometime in the future, and I was. The thing about flying as a scout, you always would run. You know, I can see why they ask, did you fly guns? We had gunships and then Cobras, and they had all kinds of armament, and they supported me, and I supported them. We supported one another, so it was, the war was always fought with gunships and scout ships, and every action that the first Cav was in started with one of our scout ships. I mean, they would see just an antenna sticking up over the jungle, or they would see a trail with scattered debris or something, and turn it into a battle, and the next thing we know, we have an entire squadron of aircraft out there, and then that was modified by having a lot of artillery. We might have had some F4s come in and drop some napalm. I mean, every main battle that the first Air Cav was involved in began with one of our scout ships. And I'd never even heard of a scout ship. I didn't know what scout ships did or why they did it, and we were in gunships just as much as anybody was. We had 2 ships at a time, and we supported one another. The first action that I was in, I was in not as the lead ship, but as a chase ship. I was learning the ropes, and we encountered a squad of Viet Cong led by a paymaster in a Soviet uniform, and he had already paid the troops apparently because he didn't have any money on him. But we caught him. We caught him in some tall elephant grass. Elephant grass is razor sharp grass that's maybe 6 to 8 feet high, and they were kind of walking through that very slowly when the lead ship caught them, saw them, opened fire on them, and we set up. We called it a daisy chain, but there were just 2 ships flying in a circle at the top of the grass. And the enemy was trying to hide from us. And that was when I saw my first dead Viet Cong. I saw them laying in foxholes. I put a couple there. I mean, I put them there. I didn't pull the trigger, but it was my flying skill that put the machine gun where it needed to be, and he did the work. And our door gunners, I'm serious. We were all buckled in, of course. We actually sat on a piece of ceramic armor, and there was a piece of ceramic armor uh, bolted to the back of our firewall, and we wore a chest protector that was kind of a curved coat that we would put on, and those things were some protection against small arms fire, 30 caliber and smaller, but 51 caliber that we were afraid of go right through everything. And so I didn't know how to use hand grenades. I had practice throwing a hand grenade when I was in training, but we had every kind of hand grenade imaginable and used them for different purposes. Example, if we spotted some Viet Cong and we took them under fire, and of course they took us under fire and they scattered and they jumped into a hole. Well, our machine gun couldn't do anything about the hole, but our grenades could. And so I would drop down even lower so that my gunner could throw a grenade into the cave. Well, sometimes they had a blast shield inside the cave that they could get around, and the grenade would go off in there and it wouldn't hurt them, and we could tell that happened. So we had tear gas. We would throw tear gas in and they'd come running out because they couldn't breathe, and we'd kill them. So they started having gas masks. They'd leave them in the cave in case they needed them and put a gas mask on, and they didn't have to come running out. Well, we found out if you throw a tear gas grenade and follow it with a smoke grenade, the mask didn't filter out the smoke, just the tear gas. So the smoke would be in a confined area. They'd come running out because they couldn't breathe, and we'd kill them. I mean, we literally were flying killing machines. We were doing reconnaissance because if we didn't find anything, that means that we could use ground troops to go elsewhere. They're not there. Well, but once the army said, you guys need to go north, they probably didn't use casual language that way, but that's what we talked about. You guys got to go north up to the DMZ and break the siege around those Marines that are trapped with 40,000 NVA troops on the main supply route from North Vietnam. So they sent the first cav up there, sent the army to save the Marines, and the Air Force. There was no ground movement. The troops couldn't get in a truck and go elsewhere. They were all stuck inside this little hilltop with bunkers and such. And they had an airfield that was a short one, and C-130 type aircraft would come in, and as they were rolling, they would drop the back door of the C-130 and they would push supplies out the back door and never stop rolling, because when the NVA saw that a plane was landing, they would start sending mortar shells, which they had well aimed because of the practice they had, onto the runway and try to get the ship. They never did. But that ship was rolling, and so they were throwing out cargo, and at the other end of the runway, there were wounded that they were on stretchers that they were throwing into the back of the C-130 to go back to the first aid. Successfully. One of the fellows that's in my Veterans Center group in Ventura flew C-130s. And he said he flew 535 combat assaults. And I thought, wow. I've never asked him how many bullet hits he took and stuff like that. I took bullet hits all too often. But see the way that last helicopter is trying to hit the pilot is a pretty hard shot. That's why they were trying to teach him how to do it. Well, once we transitioned after the Tet Offensive into the helicopter in the center of the OH-6 Alpha, they call that Loach. It was the Loach. That's the nickname, was Flying Loaches. Initially, our Loaches that I flew was a scout ship. I had a minigun on the left skid, an 8-barreled rotating gun that fired either 2,000 or 4,000 rounds a minute that I could control from when the control that's in front of me is cyclic. There's a little cover and a trigger, and I could pull it to the first indent of the trigger, 2,000 rounds, pull it to the second, 4,000 rounds of ammunition. But of course, the only problem was I only carried 1,000 rounds of ammunition for it because of fuel limitations and weight limitations. Plus, I had a door gunner that had an M60 machine gun. And so the way I used the minigun, you would fire it in 3-second bursts. That's pretty normal for any machine gun. You shoot it in 3-second bursts. And so the minigun, it would fire up one bullet every time the barrel came lined up with the magazine. And so a 3-second burst at 2,000 rounds a minute, I do the math, I don't know, that's 40 rounds, 40 bullets that were sent out there. And not only 40 bullets out there, that was 40 shell casings down there that would fall onto the ground. So when I flew with the minigun, and they took them off eventually because of weight limitations, but when I flew with a minigun, I would fly and I would point it as far under the ship as it would go and as far forward as it would go, because typically if I took ground fire, that's where it was coming from. And so while I'm moving, the ground fire was usually in the back part of the aircraft. They weren't shooting it properly. And so when I had my minigun pointed underneath and forward, I could just do a 3-second burst, and the guys on the ground, they didn't know what, all they heard was this roar. That was what it sounded like when it fired, because of all those barrels shooting. There were bullets hitting all around them, and there was all of these shell casings falling on them, and they didn't know what that was. And so all I wanted to do was to stop shooting at me while I got the hell out of there. And so it gave me a chance to get away if I needed to, and I used that tactic more than once. But all I needed to do was to get away, and so then my chase ship would take them under fire, and I'd come back around and take them under fire. Now I knew where they were, roughly. And so that was a daily mission. There were 2 missions that we were assigned as scouts that we had to fly every day. And our flights were usually short. They were usually 2 hours. That's all the fuel that we carried, was 2 hours worth of fuel. So sometimes we had small fire bases out around in our AO, area of operations. We would have smaller fire bases that had fuel. And so if we were in a really hot situation and didn't want or didn't have time to fly back to our base at LZ 2 bits to start with, we could go to another fire base, refuel, and then continue the battle. And we had to do that a number of times. I had adventures on almost every flight. I mean, so many that trying to remember them all, I tried to do in preparation for this. And I remembered, and I have them, I think they're over there, 20 pages, single-spaced, divided by the occasion. And I had a name for it. When I crashed, I have a story about that.
Yes, do tell us about that. That was
When
a
I crashed.
refueling mission. Tell us what happened.
That was a young, stupid pilot. But I was an officer, and so uh, I was sent along with 4 other ships to go north to the DMZ when the Tet Offensive had started. So we usually would fly in a line formation, one behind the other, just because it was convenient. We could see and so forth. And so we needed to be refueled. Well, I was told that we could refuel at an air base that was along our pathway. And so we pulled in, we talked to the tower, we landed. So we needed to refuel, and they sent us to a POL point, gasoline point, to a POL point, and it was just a hose sticking out of the ground with a nozzle and a tin can right next to it. And so in this flight, we were loaded up for the move, and we had, I mean, the ships were so grossly overloaded with all of our personal gear that we couldn't get in the duffel bag that went by truck. And we had ammunition in case we needed it. We had grenades. We even had our monkey. And our monkey was in my chase ship next to me. And so we always refueled hot, meaning we didn't shut the aircraft down. It was always running. And everything is just friction down to the floor so it wouldn't take off. And the gunner would jump out, and he's the one who would do the gasoline. Well, on this trip, because it wasn't intended for a combat ride, we had our crew chief, who normally didn't fly with us. He was over there, crew chief by the name Spec 4 Amsden. And so we were hooked up with the intercoms, and it was long intercom. And so he jumps out of the ship and gets the gasoline, and he comes over and he's ready to put it into the ship. And over the intercom, I said, check it and make sure it's avgas, because there are different kinds of gasoline, and we needed the red stuff that was 100 octane for aviation. And that's why there was a tin can over there, is you would just give the nozzle a squeeze, and they would see what color came out. Was it yellow, or was it red, or was it clear? It was yellow. And he tells me, sir, it's yellow. I said, that's JP4. We need avgas. Get back in the aircraft. And so I called the tower and said, you sent us to the wrong point. You need to send us to avgas. He said, well, it's on the other side of the runway. I said, oh boy. I said, are we cleared across? They had 5 ships. And so it said, you're cleared across now. And so I lifted it. So now the crew chief is in the aircraft, and the hose is gone. And so I lifted up to a hover, and I got about 3 feet off the ground, which is what normal thing. And a gust of wind, I guess, caught me, because all of a sudden, poof, the helicopter started to spin around. Well, I'd never had experienced that before. And so as I'm fighting it, now as an experienced pilot, I should have just set it down, because I wasn't but 3 or 4 feet off the ground when it started. It might spread the skids out, but that's easily remedied and so forth. But no. I was super pilot. I was going to fly it out. And so I'm battling this thing, and it's spinning around, and we're getting higher and we're getting higher. And I had 4 other ships sitting back there, and my fear was that I would fall on them. I knew I was going to fall, but I didn't want to fall on them. So I managed to get away from them out into some sand before we got to the asphalt. And I got up to maybe 20 or 30 feet, I don't know. But I was face down, literally looking straight down at the ground. And I remember saying on the intercom, we're going in. And boom, we hit. And things happened. It completely demolished the aircraft. And I think it knocked me unconscious for a very short while. But I came to, and I was sitting on the ground, and there was nothing around me. And Amsden, my crew chief, he was in my lap. And so what the hell are you doing? And so as I picked him up, the blade had come through the cockpit and cut his seat in half. He hadn't been buckled in like he was supposed to be. I was busy reading him the riot act for not checking the fuel, I suspect. And he just jumped back in the ship, didn't bother to buckle up because we were just going across the runway. And so when we hit, boom, he was in my lap. And that blade, as it came on around, boom, it came through, broke through the bubble, of course, and it literally cut his seat in half. And I know without any hesitation that if he had been buckled in, it would have killed him. My control over on my left was bent across my knee. Oh, my chin had hit my chest protector. I don't know how it could have, but it hit my chest. And so I have a little scar that I hide with my little beard here that I finally grew. But I have a little scar there. So I was hospitalized overnight and then released the next day. So I have pictures that he took of the aircraft, and it was a pile of rubble. And he saved a piece of it, piece of the bubble, piece of plexiglass that goes around where the door would be. Piece of plexiglass about that big. I have it on a plaque in my office. And I say, this is the ship that I crashed, first lieutenant, blah, blah, blah. I'm not proud that I crashed, but I'm proud that I admit it, and I think it was my fault. If I'd have had more experience, I would have immediately set it down and would have stopped everything. It would have spread the skids, which is a constant hazard in helicopters. But we would not have crashed like that. But so it was a non-combat experience, but it was an adventure that I've written about in pretty much in detail, like I just told you. So the rest of the ships went on to a city called Dong Ha, which was where we operated as a unit. By ourselves, we were the only first cab outfit there. There's helicopters. Everything else were Marines and Air Force. It was an Air Force base. And so we were put into a space that a previous aircraft had been larger aircraft. They had huge bunkers that had been built, but they were too big for us. So we would just park next to one of them. But Seabees came in, they built us housing. We didn't have to live in a tent. I thought that was pretty good, except I hated living in a house with all those other guys roaming around. I was an officer. Usually there were two people in an officer's tent, but I'd become a hazard to other pilots because whoever was in my tent, he got shot down. He got shipped out. Wasn't my fault. I didn't tell tales on him or anything, but it happened to me, and it doesn't have to happen more than twice for everybody else to say, "Don't sleep with Lieutenant Frields because you get shot down." I don't know why. We lost a scout ship pretty much every week, or a gunship. We used our blues all the time. Our blues would be sent out to a crash site to secure it until we could pick up the aircraft, until we could take care of the troops. There were times when we couldn't get out to feed them, but we could drop off ammunition, we could drop off water, never stop, fly over and drop it out the door to them. We spoiled them. We spoiled them rotten. They'd be out doing a reconnaissance on the ground and at a little village, and they'd come to a little stream or a river. Well, they didn't want to get wet, so they'd call for the blue ships to pick them up and take them to the other side of the river. And we'd pick them up, take them over there, drop them off again. Because when you went in the water, it was pretty hard to fight from the water if you got attacked. not only that, that there were leeches in the water, and you get leeches all over you, and so you spend the next hour pulling them off of you. And so there was some justification for picking them up and just taking them. Of course, we give them the ribbing about it. It was a group of infantry assigned to an aviation unit, and they did all of the KP, and they did all of the guard duty, and they took care of the refuge to burn it and so forth. They did just about everything. We always had outdoor facilities. And when we were at LZ 2-bit South, we just had a one-holer, but it had a green piece of plastic hanging for privacy purposes. And it was by the perimeter. We don't want that anywhere close where the troops are sleeping. And so one day I was using that facility, and as as you may have seen from some of the pictures, I wore a 38 Special in a shoulder holster. I don't know why. It was out of the way when I flew, so that was some good thinking on somebody's part. And so I wore the 38 Special up here. So I had it on, and so and I wore it 24/7. And I wasn't sleeping. I didn't wear it, but I wore it all the time because we were always subject to a ground attack, always. And so I was using the facility, and I'm sure it was a Viet Cong snake crawled in through the bottom of the. I mean, there was nothing down there to stop it, and the curtain that we had, it ended about that high off the ground. So it was pretty obvious this little snake started crawling in, and it was getting pretty close to my toes. And so I made a command decision. I pulled out my gun and I shot it. Oh, well, who fired that shot? The sirens go off, and people are running and they're jumping, and who fired that shot? And it was me. I did it. I shot a snake. Well, they said in the future, step on it. Don't shoot it, because when you shoot it, we don't know. I understand, Colonel. I won't do it again. But that was my first encounter with the enemy, was that snake that wanted to join me. We flew daily missions. There were two types of missions that we always flew. And one of us called First Light, and the other one was called Last Light. And as the name implies, one of them, the First Light, was we were given an area to do a reconnaissance, and we took off in the dark in order to arrive at the location that they were sending us at dawn. And one of the great advantages to that is the Viet Cong especially, but also the NVA troops, they carried their rations with them, and their rations were usually a baggie with a bag of cooked rice. And in the morning, that was what they were going to eat for the day. They were a hell of a group of troops. A little bag of cooked rice, and they put it in some hot water that they'd make a fire and heat it up so it was hot at least. And there'd be the slightest little bit of smoke coming up from it through the jungle. That's all I needed. I would come out to the area in the dark, get to the area, and recognize it as the sun is coming up by looking at the mountaintops around us. And I was an excellent map reader, and I taught my gunners always to read maps, because because I was busy flying, and sometimes I needed to get what we called a grid, a location that we had taken ground fire, and I needed him to get it because I was busy getting away from it. So I taught them how to read it too, in all these little circles. They mean this, and these circles mean this when they're far apart and when they're close together. And you see and they're hard to see when you're flying at treetop level, because you got mountains that are tall, but you can see peaks. And so if you can recognize peaks and compare them to the map, you learn to do that, and I did, and I taught them. And it was always, once you arrived at the reconnaissance site, now the sun is just coming up, and so we would come out at altitude. When I say altitude, 5,000 feet. We would come out at 5,000 feet, two little ships, and then one ship would stay high, and the lead ship, which was me, I would drop down low. This guy would do the navigating pretty much while I did the inspections down here. So I saw most of the action, but thank heavens, my chase ship, he would end it. He would see where I was being shot at, and he would come in behind me, and he would wipe them out. It was a good system. Anyway, so I'd be down at a very low level. I mean, literally treat. Sometimes I'd come back and there'd be leaves that I caught in my skids, and the inspection. I mean, we had another captain that was the maintenance officer, and he said, "Lieutenant, why do you always have leaves in your skids?" I mean, we had skid shoes so they wouldn't wear out, and there was some space there. And if you flew low, you were going to grab some bushes. And I said, I was just flying along, and a Viet Cong bush jumped up right in front of me, and I couldn't avoid it, so I just went ahead and went right. I said, "Don't go through them." Okay, but so I'm low level. Treetop level is that's where I'm actually safest. They can hear me, but they can't see me because there's jungle there, and I was using the jungle to hide exactly where they were going to see me to shoot at me. If there was a gap in the jungle and I flew over it, I always took ground fire. So I wanted to avoid any gaps in the jungle, so I stayed over the jungle, and I could see muzzle flashes. My gunner could see muzzle flashes. So I could smell the smoke of their cooking fires. So I'd be flying along, and what we would say when you're just confident, overconfident, you're just fat, dumb, and happy. You're flying along, and you fly like this, and you fly through, you could smell smoke. Not supposed to be any smoke. So you'd circle around and start circling. Where's the smoke coming from? Which way's the wind blowing? It's blowing that way. That means the smoke's coming from over there. And so you start looking, and invariably you would find something. And it would be a small group of enemy. They would scatter. They would shoot at you as they scattered or something like that, and we would shoot at them, and we usually won. But so we would report that we saw these guys and they were hanging around this particular spot. So what that told higher ups is, tomorrow night we're going to put some artillery on that local area right there, because we know they're coming through there, and they're called H&I fires, harassment and interdiction. That's what the artillery does. I learned that in artillery school. H&I fires would shoot at night, just on targets that we didn't know if there's anything there or not. But we had plenty of ammunition, and so we put a few artillery rounds there, 2 or 3, and then go to another spot, shoot for another spot, just to tell them, I wouldn't come through there because we might shoot again. And just to harass and to interdict their trail. Well, that was pretty much always the case. And it wasn't until we started up north during Tet, and there wasn't just a few little troops down there. There was a company of troops. I mean, a lot of NVA in regular uniforms with machine guns and all that kind of stuff. So we fought a different kind of war. We were superior fighting the Charlie, Viet Cong, Victor, Charlie. We called him Charlie. We called him everything under the sun besides humans. We didn't want to call them humans because you don't kill humans. You kill the enemy. You kill Charlie. You kill Victor Charlie. And so we did our best to kill the enemy, or at least to find the enemy and kill him later. It was that morning mission that I liked the most, because I felt that was a hazard that I could be shot down. Every time I took off, there was a hazard that I could be shot down, because we lost a scout ship. Pretty much every week we would lose one. We might catch the pilot, save the pilot and the gunner, but we lost that ship, and it would be picked up and carried away and either repaired and sent back, whatever. But we had a pretty good survival rate, actually. I think we did. At least we convinced ourselves we did. But that was for the first light mission. If I got shot down, I had the whole day to escape and evade the enemy while they tried to pick me up. Because believe me, if I went down, a good portion of the world would come to get me and succeed. So I liked First Light mission. It was just a 2-hour mission. You had to take off and hover around in the dark. Always tricky because you can't see anything. But once you got out there and you dropped down to treetops as the sun was coming up, it was beautiful. I mean, I saw some beautiful mountains. I saw some beautiful sunrises, and I loved that morning mission. If I encountered something, I would refuel and they would send me back out, because I knew where they had been specifically, and I could mark it better for gunships or for the attack air to come in with napalm or whatever the bombs. So I liked the First Light missions. The other mission that was a daily was the Last Light. So we'd be sent out getting close to sunset to check an area that we thought might be a likely area of the enemy approaching our position, wherever we were at a fire base. And the last thing we would do, first we cleared that area. I don't see anybody crawling through the grass, because we would be down there crawling with him pretty much. But I don't see anybody crawling through the grass or through the bushes. I don't see anybody around anywhere. And so I'm gonna do the perimeter. And so I would fly around our perimeter. We had guard paces around our perimeter in bunkers. And then in front of that, we had multiple layers of wire, different kinds of wire, to make it hazardous for someone to kind of walk in towards us. There was usually a pathway through there if you knew where it was, but it was a zigzag type of a path that we could use to go out and get something and to come back. But so we had all these wire, different kind of razor wire, barbed wire, trip wire with flares and all sorts of things around our perimeter to slow down and to advise us when we're being snuck up on and attacked. And then beyond that is where I would fly around that edge, just beyond the wire. Low level is where I would come all the way around whatever our fire base was. Is there somebody crawling through the grass right now? And it's just getting dark, and I could just barely see the grass or the bushes, and it's clear. So I would come in and I would land and refuel my ship, and my gunner would go his way to clean his machine gun, and I would go my way to find a bunk where I could sleep, because I'd be completely out of energy. I mean, I exposed, and I think all of the pilots did. Most of our pilots were young warrant officers. I was still a young guy, even at 25. But responsibility weighs heavy on an officer's shoulders, always. You're responsible. I was responsible for not only me and my gunner, but I was responsible for my chase ship, a warrant officer usually, and his gunner. And so it may not have seemed like it at the time, But that's a heavy responsibility that I'm the one that's going to decide whether they get shot at or not. This went on in different degrees for the first 9 months that I was there. At the end of that 9 months, I went on R&R, if I remember correctly, with one of my other scouts that had been there for a while. We both went to Hawaii to see our wives. And it was so fun. I remember it well. We went out in a commercial jet liner, and we were sitting next to one, and we played Crazy Eight all the way there. I mean, to Hawaii, and we landed. And so on the way, Smith, I don't want to see you. I don't want to think about you. I don't want to hear stories about you. Until we get back on the airplane to come home, I want to be away from there. I'm going to be with my wife and my new baby, and I don't want to know you. I don't even want to remember you. And I said, well, it's mutual, you asshole. And so we actually loved one another, and he died earlier this year. He called Forrest. And anyway, so we landed and we both went our ways. I had reservations over there and he had reservations over there. And I guess I wasn't in my room 30 minutes. I get a phone call. I don't have a reservation. I said, well, get one. Why in the hell are you calling me? You're not going to sleep in my room. And he said, no, I know, but I just don't. And so I gave him a little advice if he needed it. He knew what to do, I think. He just wanted to tell me that he was going to be doing something different. But he got another hotel room. So after that, my wife said, what was all that about? And I told her. And so I said, I had a duffel bag with me. And I opened it up and I had clean khaki uniforms that had been cleaned in Vietnam by Mama San, literally, and dried. So I got them back all folded up and smelling to high heavens because the water was dirty. And so I took all my fatigues, maybe 2 or 3 sets of uniforms, threw them in the bathtub, filled it with water, and soaked them down. And the water immediately turned green. Get them out of there, and the next morning, still damp, took them to a laundry, a commercial laundry taxi driver, to the local laundry, and I said, heavy starch pressed. I want them like really standing tall. And so they were when I got them just before I left. And they were clean clothes. They didn't smell. Mama San would wash them in the river. Bad idea. Everything was done in the river, the local river, including our drinking water. But then she would dry them inside of a hooch with fire. And end of story one.
In the interest of time, let's move on.
We have a critic in Bob. I don't blame it.
I'm the director and the producer. So
Got it. I got it. I have no problem with authority.
I make these decisions
You got it.
because I'm really very reluctant because
No.
what you're sharing is amazing.
It's gripping.
This is the kind of stuff people don't know about.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
And I think it's my job to tell them, and I'll honor your cut. Okay.
Well, we don't want to forget the second tour because that's interesting.
Oh,
too.
the second tour.
Wow. Yeah.
The second. I did. Okay. Let me finish the first tour. So those 9 months I flew as a scout, but by then I was promoted to Captain 03. And most of our pilots were warrant officer ones. We called them wobbly ones, WO1s. Most of them were warrant officers. We had a couple of commissioned officers that were leading the pack and that sort of thing. So, but I was the captain, and I was flying scouts, and they said, "You're going to be the new admin officer for the troop." And I said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "Well, you're going to take care of everything." Oh, and so we had a first sergeant, and we had me, and the first sergeant had to teach me what to do. By the way, I never had a job in the Army or in civilian life that I knew how to do, and so that's a good bit of information for anybody that's looking for work. Take a job, learn it as you're doing it. I never knew including being a photographer. I never had been in a studio until I owned one. But then I went to school at Moore Park College and studied photography. So that last 3 months was very important for me. I was in charge, and I have orders there that are copies of orders and unit orders that assigned me to every additional duty that an officer, commissioned officer, would have. Shoe officer, toes officer, belt officer, mess off. I mean, everything you can imagine, and I have them all listed there. Or I have most of them listed there. But one of them was mess officer. So I had a sergeant that was in charge of being our cook, and it was always tent, K rations they called it. Everything was reconstituted, powdered eggs, powdered milk. We occasionally would have some kind of meat, but it had, however amount it was, it had to all be eaten because we had no refrigeration to keep it or any of that kind of stuff. And our monkey had mashed potatoes, he had peas, he had green beans, he liked all that stuff. And he'd just stuff them all in his little cheeks at the same time. By the way, Monk had his own bunker with tether, and he lived in that bunker. Anything you were missing, look in the bunker. If Monk found it, it wound up in that bunker. But so, as the mess officer, I happened to notice that we were sitting in these mermaid-type trays, eating reconstituted food, and we were sitting on sandbags around the place, usually in the sun. And so I thought, we need some kind of tables and chairs, benches, for our men to to sit in and eat. And so I started making some inquiries up through channels, and I got a hold of some special forces guys that said, there's just up the road from where you're stationed at Camp Evans, there's up the road just a short ways. There's a little village, and the village chief is a Catholic priest, but they have carpenters. And he said, I've talked to Father James, and he's open to discussing making furniture for you, but you got to go up there and talk to him. I said, okay. So I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to walk, and I can't use the helicopter for that kind of work. So I borrowed the CO's Jeep and his driver and a trailer. And in the trailer, I went over to the artillery battery, and the 105 battery gets its ammunition, two big shells in a wooden box. And so, boom, boom, they shoot the two shells. The wooden box, they throw it in the pile. When they get a big enough pile, they burn it because they just don't need the space and there's no use for it. So if we wanted wood to build something, we would go over and get some ammo boxes, bring them home, and we could use the nails that they were made out of, and we could build stuff in that dimension. And everything was in that dimension, the size of we had no saws, we had a hammer and the nails that were in the boxes. And so I took a load of those boxes with me, and we took off up Highway 1. And this would have been summer months, so things were pretty quiet in our AO at least. And so we full dress with breast protectors and M16s and grenades and everything, and just the two of us in a Jeep with a trailer. And so we go up the highway. Somehow I found that village. It must not have been hard to find. I found that village, and this young priest comes out in just civilian clothes. I have pictures of him. I have pictures of the two of us together that I'm so glad I had my driver take. Father James was his name, and we struck a deal. I would send him wood. He would use that wood to build us benches and tables for our troops to sit at to eat. And then in exchange, he would use the other half for whatever they needed because they couldn't get wood either. The wood came from the jungle, but that's where the bad guys were. So the villagers didn't want to go in the jungle unless they had to. Some villagers would go and they would bring back firewood, but to bring back a tree or something that you could cut into planks wouldn't happen. So we did that, match made in heaven. I had my picture taken with Father James. I never spent any other time with him, but the sweet time I spent with him, he invited us in his house. It was a French-built house, two-story house, no windows, no doors, just openings, and a sofa much older than the one I'm sitting on. And he said, "Would you like to come in? And would you like to have a Coca-Cola?" Well, we had Cokes, canned Cokes. And I said, yeah, I would, Father. And I'm a former Catholic, so I called him Father. And so he went in a back room and he came back with a tall glass with Coca-Cola and one ice cube in it. My assumption was that's all he could spare, but I got one and my driver got one. Both got one ice cube and a Coca-Cola, which we sipped and drank and we talked, we made a deal. Well, I sent him more wood as time went on. He built picnic tables for us and benches. And once that was done, he wanted more wood. So he said, I can build desks. I told him that I was flying a desk mostly these days. He said, I can build you a desk. And I said, oh, well, now we're talking. Now we're talking. I got lots of wood, so you can build a desk for me. You got to build a desk for my troop clerk. You got to build a desk for the first sergeant, and you got to build a desk for the CO. 4 desks. Oh, yeah. He built 4 desks. Nice desks. I don't know what happened to them because they were there when I left, but my guess is they got burned. But we had some of the comforts of life in that last 3 months. One of the non-combat things that I'll be brief about is we had a scround officer, a warrant officer, that lived in Saigon and belonged to our troop, and his only job was to get stuff for us that we couldn't get through the normal supply chain. How did he get it? We sent him captured enemy weapons, which we captured all the time. We sent them to him. He'd use them for trading materials and trade them with people in Saigon who never saw a shot fired. And we would get tin roofs, beds, mattresses, boots, socks, and a water cooler with a glass 5-gallon top. That went in the orderly room and we put water in it. And so the problem with it is that our water came from the local river, compliments of the Army, and it was heavily disinfected and all that kind of, but there were still little bits of seaweed and junk in it. So you go to get a drink of water and you push a little button, and an air bubble would bubble up and you'd see all this stuff. So immediately I told my company clerk, get tape, gaffer's tape it all the way up. I don't want to see the water. I don't want to see that stuff floating up. And so the troops would come in to fill up their canteen or something, and I'd get out of here, go fill it up elsewhere. So we showered with that same water, and it was so heavily chlorinated that when you came out of the shower, you were clean, I guess. We had hot water. We made hot water, heater and so forth. And we made showers. But the water was so heavily chlorinated, you itched like crazy. You'd get back to wherever your bunk was, and we had a wool blanket they issued us. You'd get that wool blanket all over you and just rub it. I mean, oh my God, I itched like crazy. I went on sick call a couple of times about that, and the flight surgeon said, just get used to it. And he said, there's no cure for it. You're going to have water to drink. You're going to take showers in it. Sometimes you shower twice a day. I mean, it was hot. And if it hadn't have been for a wind blowing all the time, we'd never gotten helicopters off the ground, I swear. Because you always had to take off into the wind because it was the humidity and the heat was combined. You really lost a lot of lift, and so you had to face into the wind and get an extra lift. Now I flew the H-13, I flew the H-06 out, but I also flew Hueys. Hueys is the workhorse of the Vietnam War. It's just like the Black Hawk is today. Only the Black Hawk is bigger and more powerful. But we had Hueys, and I flew Hueys also. I didn't fly them all that often, but I didn't fly a regular combat mission, but I did do other flights flying the Huey, but I always flew with an aircraft commander, a warrant officer, who, when we were flying, he outranked me, period, because he had more flight time than I did, and I didn't have a problem. I don't have a problem with authority. And so I would fly and he would do the navigation, he would handle the radios and altitudes and all that. He'd just tell me what he wanted, and that's what I did. And so where I would fly is as I would pick up troops, maybe, but laundry, and fly to Da Nang, which was about an hour's flight away. Had to go up over an 8,000-foot mountain tab and then down the other side to the bay. And it was a fun ride, fun flight, because we flew at least 5,000 feet. Nobody shot at me. I would fly over the edge of the ocean. I would, get this, I would fly over the edge of the South China Sea. Is this me? I'm from San Antonio. What do I know? I fly over the edge of the South China Sea because there's no place for anybody to hide, so they wouldn't shoot at me. So I would fly over the edge of the ocean in the surf above it. We'd go to Da Nang, and it was a huge city, and they had landing pads everywhere. We would just pick a pad, land close to it. A truck would come driving by, flag it down. Hey, yeah, I'm an officer. Yeah, you're right. I'm an officer. Come on over here. What do you want? And the young guy, of course, all the grad draftees. We need some help with these with the guys would put their laundry in a laundry bag and close the top, have a string top, and put their name on it and a little piece of paper inside. And so we'd load those laundry bags out, enlisted, and then would unload them from the Huey, put them in the back of the passing truck. He would then take us over, all of us over to the laundry. He would unload it into the laundry, load any laundry that was there, come back. That was all wrapped in a paper bag and tied. Name was on it, and then a piece of paper. And so that would go back to the ship to be loaded, while the truck would take whoever else wanted to, and we would go to the exchange, the post exchange, PX, and I would buy beer and sodas to take back to the troops that we gave to our troops free, and I sold to the Seabees that were next door neighbors. They were happy to pay $1. What can I say? But so I would buy beer and soda, and as we eventually got electricity through our own doing, we got electricity, little refrigerators and fans, and stereos for that matter, and so that would come back from the exchange in our ship, and then if you wanted something that's in the ship, you go get it. I'm out, and so it was always a pleasant event. On one occasion, we went in and we landed at a pad that was in an Air Force fighter base, and we said we're hungry. We've been eating constituted food. You got any place to eat around here? And he said, well, our mess hall is pretty. He said, but there's a Chinese restaurant right outside the gates. So me and my crew, and we're wearing Nomex flight suits kind of thing. And so we go out, and Da Nang was relatively safe at that point. And so we go in this restaurant, and the thing I noticed, they had air conditioning units on the roof. So we walk in the door and it's cool inside. Oh Lord, we're in the right place. I don't care what they serve. We're cool. And along the wall, as we walked in, along the wall, there was every piece of military equipment that I have ever seen, all stacked very neatly, guns included, guns with grenades and chest protectors, and in the restaurant, it was the biggest Chinese restaurant I ever saw in Vietnam, and there were people wearing coat and tie. There were round eyes, women, American women, round eyes, plus Vietnamese women, donut dollies, Red Cross workers that would make donuts and bring them out to the troops. They were there in their little blue outfits. I mean, it was like you were stateside. And so that was where I had the best three flavored fried rice I ever tasted, and I eat it to this day. It was great. But that was just because that was a unit that we frequently used for support. I don't remember their name, but we as scouts especially, we were always, there's always at least two of our ships that were out flying around. If it wasn't me, there was one of the other leads, or the one. So we had about 12 or 15 ships. I don't even know, to tell you the truth. But there were always two of us out there flying around, just looking for trouble. So if somebody needed something, we were already out there. Well, who might need something is, there was a group of men that I do not understand. They had a little encampment just close to us, next door to us. They were called LRPs. You may have heard it in other interviews. They were called Long Range LRRPS, LRP. And that's the way we pronounce it. It's Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol is what the Army called it. Now, these were guys that had silencers on their weapons. They had FM radios that they could talk to Washington, D.C. on the radio from the ground. There's usually 4 or 5 of them in a group. They were always in some kind of camouflage, ghillie suits, if you know what those are. They're all suits that have weeds all through them, face paint, and all that sort of thing. These guys, they were trail watchers. They would go out in a line of Hueys, and they would fly along, and they knew where they wanted to have them go in recon. So they would pretend to land at different places and take back off. And when they got to the real spot, these guys would jump off immediately before the aircraft even touched down. They'd jump off the aircraft, out of the aircraft, and they would inflate dummies in the aircraft. So when the aircraft took off, it looked like there were people still on board. Because we always knew that there was somebody watching, or at least that was the premise. So these guys would hang out there for a week or so, or until they were found, and they would make reports quietly. Whisper into the microphone, and it was a situation where if they needed to be picked up immediately, emergency, they'd been found. Guess who they called? The guys who have a ship out there all the time, us. So we couldn't pick them up, but what I could do, and I worked. Oh, their call sign was Dark Marauder. The Army has great names, right? Dark Marauders and a number. But so I'd get a call from them. It's a Dark Marauder, and they'd be running down the trail. We're being chased by I don't know how many, 4 of us. Which way do we go? So it's my job to find a space to tell them, well, you better turn right and go through the jungle here, and there's a clearing, and the Huey can pick you up there. So meanwhile, I was calling back to my base and saying, give me some gunships and a couple of Hueys. And so we'd have a couple of gunships, and a couple of Hueys would come out empty, and the Hueys would drop down, and these guys would jump in, and we'd bring them home. And so they liked us. They were our next door neighbor. And more than one time, we saved their bacon. One time it was at night. And there was no place for for the Huey to land. I wasn't involved. I was listening to it on the radio in our operations. They had to lower ropes that were provided by the Lerb company. They had to lower ropes and hook up to the rope, and they were hauled out and hauled like that. They're hanging beneath the Hueys to get them out of the jungle and back to safety. The only problem with that was it was dark. You couldn't see anything to speak of. The rotating beacons and such on the helicopters were turned off because it gives you some odd visual things at night like that. They dropped the ropes in, and people suited up with the ropes and came out. The ropes were different lengths, and everybody thought they were all the same length. So as they're coming back to our landing strips, one of the guys, they were looking out the side of the ship, hanging over the edge. You could see the guy hanging there, and so down, come lower. He's got his feet on the ground. Okay, he's done. You can. And the other guy on that, there's two at a time. Guy on the other ship, he's being dragged along the runway. It happened to two guys. They got dragged along the runway. Their fault. We're having two different length ropes. You couldn't see them. I went to visit one of them in the hospital just because I wanted to go see him. And I said, hey, I'm sorry that our guys dragged you. I mean, he was all beat up and bloody. Not seriously, but he was hurt. And I said, I am so sorry that we didn't realize that we had a longer rope on it. Our guys were looking out at the shorter rope, and we thought it was safe. And he said, not a problem. He said, you can drag me all day long anytime you want, but you got to get me out of that jungle when I need to get out. Got that. So I think I don't know if you want to hear about the time I got shot down. I'm willing to talk about it if you'd like. It was one of those things that NVA, close by our base, a village that we were in the process of wiping off the face of the map. My unit was. If my turn to come out, two ships, we came out. I was just orbiting uphill, but low level, uphill from where the battle was going on down in the valley. Just waiting for someone to come tell me, now's the time, come on in. And as I was circling around, all of a sudden, my gunner, I think his name was Jones, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I saw him jump and point the machine gun and fire off a burst. And of course, whenever that would happen, my response to his movement is to keep him shooting at the target. So I would always go wherever he was shooting. So he was always had his gun pointed at the target, and I was high, so to speak, above it. And he had spotted 3 NVA soldiers trying to hide in a bush. And he just saw them. They were there in their khaki uniforms and pith helmets and weapons. And so he saw them, and his instinct, like he usually did, he attacked. And he shot and killed all 3 of them. Well, so meanwhile, I'm coming around, and I'm up in an attitude about like so, belly down here, and I'm right at the top of the grass and so forth. And a guy jumps up in the bushes in front of me. I could see the sweat on his forehead. I mean, I looked at him, he looked at me, and he opened fire and emptied an automatic weapon into my ship. I got shot in the leg. My gunner got shot in the foot. My ship got shot so bad we threw it away. I had a couple of hand grenades that were hit by his ground fire in my box of grenades. One of them was a a tear gas grenade, and the other one was a white phosphorus grenade. The white phosphorus grenade, if it had gone off, it would have been catastrophic. It's a blow up type, but the tear gas grenade, the tear gas is a talcum like powder inside the grenade body, and when it burns down to the bottom, it burns and it burns all this talcum and it makes it into tear gas. Well, the powder was hit and it was leaking out of the base of the grenade. So much to the extent I didn't become aware of it. The other ships thought I was on fire. That much looked like smoke. Looked like smoke. And of course, all of my controls were, everything was going the wrong way, and the ship was buckling like it was a horse or something or other. And the gunship immediately broke away and came over, Huey gunship, and on the radio, set it down, we'll pick you up. They didn't know that there was another company of NBA crawling underneath me. So I wasn't going to sit it down. And so my gunner, who had got his foot shot, he's grabbing my arm. This is my flying arm. He's grabbing my, I'm hit. I know it. And so I had to get him off of this arm. I instinctively, I just gave him an elbow right in the face and knocked him out, apparently, because he just slumped back in the seat. He's all strapped in. He slumped back in the seat. Meanwhile, I'm trying to fly this ship, and they're saying, set it down. They don't know about the bad guys, and they think my ship is on fire, and use your pedals. My hydraulics are gone, and use your pedals. And so everybody was trying to help me, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I was close enough that I could see my base in the distance, and they were watching us with binoculars, what was going on in the battle. So I started heading in that direction. The gunship came with me. My chase ship, I didn't know this until maybe 30 years later. My chase ship, when I was first reestablished with that pilot, Steve DaCosta was his name, a warrant officer. Steve could fly like an eagle, but he couldn't hover. Damn, I mean, he's likely to hit anything if he's hovering. Get him up in the air and he's like an eagle. Anyway, Steve said, yeah, I remember that, Forrest. You know the guy that shot you? He says, I killed him. I said, well, Steve, I appreciate that. Thank you. But he was still standing up shooting at me, and Steve was coming behind me, and his gunner nailed him. But meanwhile, he pretty well nailed me. And so as I'm trying to fly back, all of this tear gas powder is coming all through the ship. And so I went blind. All I could see was white, just white. And so I thought I'd been wounded in the head, and that I was blood. And so I remember, this is the handle that I can hold with my knee and let go of this control. And I would wipe my brow, and I looked at my sleeve, nothing. What the heck? I didn't understand what was going on. Well, that happened 3 times. 3 times as I was flying back, I couldn't see a thing, but just white. And I wiped and nothing. I did not know what was going on. So as I'm approaching my base with all this wire around it and guys standing in the bunker, I spotted a space between 2 lines of wire big enough for me to land. So I said, I'm going to shoot a landing. And so I set up a landing. And so now my gunner's awake, and he's sitting there, he's just moaning, but he's not grabbing me. And so I set it down just as my eyes cleared and I could see the ground. And I was about 2-3 feet off the ground. Well, I wasn't going to, I had made up my mind. I was going to crash into the ground if I had to. I couldn't see. But it cleared. I couldn't see, and I could see. And when I set it down, ship settled to the ground. And it seems like I remember a gunship pulling up and sitting down next to me. I don't remember it well, but I remember turning off my battery so that it wouldn't spark a fire or whatever. And then I passed out. I woke a couple hours later, and I was laying face down in a medical facility there at Dong Ha. And I remember I was laying like this on this table, and I saw all of my gear that they'd taken off me that was over in the corner, and I said it was tear gas that I was smelling in the shade. It wasn't a smoke, it was tear gas, and it had blinded me 3 times where I could not see, and if it had not cleared up at the very last instant as I was coming in for that approach, I probably could have crashed. I mean, it's like we had been okay, I think, if I slowed up. But I remember I went to see my gunner in the hospital. He was going to be shipped to Japan, and they said there's a couple of pictures in my footlocker that you like to throw away. And okay, and so he said that was a great landing. Oh, it was a great landing. It was nothing. You know. I got a couple of weeks for light duty. I had a Band-Aid on my. I've still got a little bit of a scar that. Oh, hello. But I survived that. I was in a tent alone for a couple of weeks, then back to work.
So was your second tour as exciting as this one?
No. I didn't fly even one combat mission in my second tour. I went back as a division aviation safety. I handled all kinds of accident reports and stuff like that. I gave safety lectures. I wrote a monthly safety brochure about things we already knew. I heard about it in flight school, and so I just plagiarized everybody. But I had a lieutenant colonel that was my boss. He was the officer, and I was his only other officer. And I think we had a sergeant also in the office. So we handled all sorts of safety issues. We did safety inspections. I think Mark Southworth was the ground safety officer. He was a civilian in a military zone. He was a civilian. Highly placed in the civilian hierarchy, but Mark was a little guy, and he and I and the flight surgeon would get a Huey, and they would fly us out to the different fire bases, and we would look to see what they were doing wrong as far as helicopters coming and going to it and that sort of thing. And they would always put their antennas in the wrong place, and you got to move those antennas, and they get mad at us. I once had, by the way, I went into one of those fire bases one time that was on a hilltop, and the antennas were in front of me, and I was an inexperienced pilot. I didn't realize that if they're in front of me, how am I going to get out? I got to go that way, you know. And so I had to take off backwards. I knew it could be done, but I never had done it. So I was on the hill, so I took off backwards until I could see that daylight in front of me, and then I just broke off and flew like an eagle, like I knew what I was doing. I said, I don't think I'll do that again. That is some creepy stuff, trying to fly back, over and backwards. But suffice it to say that I survived as the admin officer. I don't think I flew anything other than my last mission as a combat mission. My last mission, and I know you want to get onto my second tour, but believe me, it's short and quick. But the last flight that I took in 1968 was not in a scout ship. It was in a Huey, and I was doing something in our office, and the siren went off. Oh, a big siren, and when that happened, anybody who was sitting around doing something, you went and got in your helicopter and you took off. And once you were in the air, they would tell you where to go. You just need to go and go now. And so everybody would just take turns getting off the ground and head north. And so we would be heading north. And so once we got off the ground, they would say, okay, you got to go to this particular spot. Here's what's happening and blah, blah, blah. We've got one of those alert company teams, a big one, 9 men. And he said, they're in a gun battle and you need to go get them out. They're on the side of a mountain and they're in a bomb crater. Okay. So by the time we got out there, all the gunships were there, and the gunships were making gun runs into the jungle, and there was a pretty dirt mountain, and there was this huge bomb crater on the side of it, and there were 9 guys laying on their belly at the edge of that bomb crater, and they were all shooting into the jungle with small arms fired. There were trees all around them, tall trees. 300 feet tall trees. But there was a hole. There was a hole where the bomb had blown out all the trees when the bomb went off there. And so I'm orbiting up here and they say, okay, Forrest, go get them. What? You mean there? Go get them there? Go get them there. Okay. And so just keep those gun runs going along the jungle because they're shooting at something. And so I came to a hover over the space. I thought it was over the space. I couldn't see it because it was under the ship. Well, I had my crew chief and my gunner. They were both laying on their bellies on the floor of the helicopter. They were looking down. And so they could go forward, go forward, go forward. We were all on the intercom. And so they were directing me to get me over the hole. And they said, okay, you're over it. Now go down. So I just started going down slowly, 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 slowly. So all of a sudden, I'm seeing trees. Whoa. And all I'm doing is flying. The aircraft commander, he's talking to somebody on the radio. He's checking all the instruments, watching everything that needs to be watched. My job is to just fly. And I'm okay with that. And so I'm just hovering down, and all of a sudden one of the back people says, stop. There's a limb that sticks out into the hole. I said, how big? And they said, pretty big. And he said, well, you're going to have to move the tail then to the right. And I moved the tail to the right. He said, is it clear? Yeah, you're clear now. Tail rotor won't hit it. Continue down. So I continued down. You can straighten out now. So I straightened out now. So I'm just watching the trees as I go down. And then all of a sudden I can feel the aircraft just stop. And it stops the right skid up against the mountain. And the left skid was floating over here. It was above the ground. There was such a slope. And I said, let's get those guys loaded. Let's get the hell out of here. And so 2 at a time, they would stop. The other would stay shooting. These 2 would come running back. They couldn't reach the left skid. It was too high. It was about 10 feet off the ground, and they were trying to jump up and catch the skid, and they couldn't do it. They had to crawl underneath the aircraft as it's hovering. That's scary. They had to crawl underneath the aircraft and come in from the uphill side because now it's up against the dirt. It pull them in. Next 2, pull them in. We got everybody on board, and the gunships are going crazy on the jungle, and said, let's go. And so I just started lifting back up, and I said, where's that branch? And he said, I'll tell you. Move your tail to the left, move it left. You're clear, come on up. And boy, I just kept coming up. And the instant I could see above the treetops, I could see sky. I just, boom, nobody had to tell me. I just dove down the side of the mountain, above the trees, and swooped up to 5,000 feet. Oh, God. And I had a load now. I had 9 people plus my regular crew. Took them back to their compound and set them down, and they all got off, and they all wanted to come by and thank me and thank the aircraft commander and thank the gunners. And I guess they would have kissed us if we had different clothes on. But they were just so happy that we got the hell out of there, and nobody was wounded. And so we left. We left them, and before we ever shut down an airplane that had been flying, we went over and refueled it. So we went to our fuel point, and the 2 pilots, we stayed in the aircraft. We refueled hot. the aircraft would be refueled by the gunner or by the crew chief or both. And so we're sitting there and we go to take, we're all done, we're okay, strike. I go to pick it up, and so the aircraft commander does the key words. I've got the aircraft. Well, the pilot says that, you let go. That means he's got it. That's why he said that. You let go, and he's got the aircraft. He's going to fly it. He said, I've got the aircraft. He said, you're done. I said, what do you mean? He said, this was your last flight. You're done. You're going home in a few days. I said, well, I knew that, but I didn't know this was my, you never know when it's your last flight. That's unlucky. And so I was lucky. I was lucky. But my last flight was the toughest that I think I was in. And I made it. And so I was back in the States, and it was like a human being again. It was in November. I had a little bit of leave, and on the way my leave was ending, and my wife and I, my new wife and I, we drove to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne. They were all in Vietnam, but the base was still there. So I was assigned to the base. And when I got there, I was given a job as one of the assistant range officer. We maintained the ranges for the new troops because the range officer, Major Richard Kidd, he was a civilian pilot, and he wanted a military pilot working for him. And so when I came in, they were looking for me and said, "Hey, we got one. Come get him." And so Major Kidd came in, and we talked a little while. And he said, "You're the guy for me. Come on, let's go." Put him on the roster. He's going to the range, and I worked in the range for a couple of years, and then I became a company commander, training those troops that had been shooting at my range, and I kept them and take care of them. And so now I'm training them about 250 of the worst kids I ever saw in my life, mostly dropouts from high school in Chicago, and just awful kids, fights and knifings and stuff. I mean, almost immediately. I had about 30 or so drill sergeants that worked for me that they actually conducted the basic training, and I just oversaw it, and it was a good job, but it was nothing like I'd been through. I mean, I had been through literally hell and back, and I knew I'd be going back again. And so the Army sent me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to study advanced artillery tech and how to use computers with the artillery and all that sort of thing. And when I finished that, I figured I was going to go back for Vietnam. I'd probably go back as a pilot, but then my branch told me that I was going to go to Germany artillery. I'm in favor of it. So as I was finishing the advanced artillery school at Fort Sill, I got my orders, and my orders were to, guess what? USC. You're going to study aviation safety. And I thought, I'm going to be a safety officer. That's cool. There are very few safety officers that were ever shot down in Vietnam that I'm aware of. Anyway. So safety officer, that sounds good. I like safety. And so I'd already done a couple of accident investigations. And so when I got back to Vietnam, I didn't fly even one combat. I didn't even fly laundry runs. I just flew a desk. We only had one really major accident while I was there. That just for the sake of posterity, I'll tell you what happened. A Chinook helicopter. It's a large helicopter. You can carry big artillery pieces and people. A Chinook helicopter was coming from Da Nang, coming back to Camp Evans, our base, and they had a bunch of troops on there that had come back from R&R. So they had a full ship, and they're just two young warrant officers flying. So they take off from Da Nang, and we're in contact with them on the radio. They come over the mountain, and then they're down along the coastline, and they're heading up towards us. And the fog was really heavy. We'd had a lot of rain and a lot of fog.
And the fog was so heavy that they got to a point that they called it. They said, listen, we can't see the road underneath us. We're turning back and we're going back to Da Nang. We'll come back on a better day. We got a lot of troops on board. And they said, under that, turn in. They didn't talk about which direction they were turning. Well, the next thing we know, we lose contact. Our radio people lost contact. Well, it was raining and it was foggy and we were operated at the edge of the mountains all the time. So it was maybe 2 days before we could get ships up in the air to go look for them because we hadn't heard from them. Well, we searched all the way out to the ocean on one side. Now they could have gone in the ocean and we can probably never find them. If they went into the mountains, they're in the mountains someplace. Well, they were in the mountains. They had made a left turn up behind a mountain and hit on the backside of it. So you couldn't see it anywhere over here down the flatland. You couldn't see it. So we checked all of that. So now we start doing all of this, and we find out they're in 300-foot trees, and you see the line that the aircraft went. They flew right into the trees, down to the ground. There were bodies hanging everywhere. My colonel said, I'll go investigate this. I'm so glad he did because I'm sure it haunted him the rest of his life, but just to see those mangled bodies. I saw mangled bodies from aircraft accident that I investigated at Fort Campbell. And to see a man's shoulder in his t-shirt, if nothing else, it's drastic. I mean, so this accident that I investigated at Fort Campbell, the pilot had called me and asked me if I wanted to ride his type of aircraft, O2. Never had been in, and I couldn't do it because I had some other commitment. So he was flying along. I don't know why he was flying. He was just passing through. Maybe he was going to spend the night with us and then move on. And he flew into the trees. And I got there. I was one of the first ones to get there besides the AMPs. And it was all roped off. And like I say, I saw his boots with his feet in them. I saw his T-shirt, part of his shoulder, part of his arm in the T-shirt. That just said other things. So that led me up to my second tour. The Army sent me to USC to study aviation safety. I was there for a semester. I was a Tommy Trojan. Who knew? I didn't know much about Tommy Trojan. I had to walk past the statue every day going to the class. We had class every morning until the afternoon. We went on field trips, usually to the different manufacturers and maybe to practice fields where they had an aircraft laid out like it was a crash site, and we had to determine what caused the crash. And we had been taught how to do it. We had been taught hypnotism, how to hypnotize yourself, how to make yourself relax. We had classes, and one of our teachers was from Newbury Park. I love that. But and so one of the guys I met at Lockheed was from Thousand Oaks. Come on out on the weekends when you were off, and we'll go to the ocean or we'll barbecue. And I did, and I was here for the 4th of July that year. That would have been 60. That would have been 71, I guess. Oh, I was here for the 4th of July in Thousand Oaks, and at CLU and the college, small college at that time, and we had a high school band, and we had a couple of local politicians and teachers and people that cheered and stuff like that. And it was so quaint and so lovable. When it came time for me to finish class and to get someplace for my wife to live, let's go to Dust and see about that. And so the rentals were kind of few and far between. We had relatives in Santa Barbara. We up in Santa Barbara. Prices were too high, but it was close to family. And bottom line was, I was staying in that Lockheed pilot's home. They were in Yuma proving grounds. And so my wife and I were vacationing from his home there in Thousand Oaks. Door knocked one day, and young realtor, "You want to sell your house?" And I said, "No, I don't want to sell it, but I might want to buy one." Oh, he got all excited then. So needless to say, we started looking at houses, and I knew what I could afford and what I couldn't. And so I saw a house over a street called Del Zero, older house, one of the original houses in Thousand Oaks. And so it was in my price range, and I was going to use the VA to pay for it anyway, so it was nothing down, listing kind of thing. And the fun part about it is I think my monthly payment was $240 a month mortgage, and the Army was paying me $245 a month for my wife to live there while I was gone. About $5 cash positive. I thought that was a good sign. And so she lived there alone. She did the final move-in. I left her with authorization to meet to sign whatever needed to be signed. So she lived there for longer than I did. And when I got out, out of the war after the second, I was told that I was going to be discharged. And I sent my baggage to Fort Sam Houston. That's where my home had been, assuming that we would go back to San Antonio. But when I got home to Thousand Oaks, she said, "Well, I'd like to stay here. I like it here." And we're close to Santa Barbara. It's where my aunt and uncle lived and my cousins. And so I didn't care. I was just glad to be home. And so I said, okay. So I did 3 months, I think it was, at Fort Sam Houston, doing nothing. I was assigned to investigate theft at the officers' club. And I outranked the manager of the officers' club. So needless to say, I had a room at the BO bachelor officer quarters, but I lived at home most of the time, drove my mother's car. It was a great time. I took I was still an amateur photographer. I took one of the best pictures of the Alamo, a night shot of the Alamo that I had occasion to use the post darkroom. I printed up 11 by 14s to give to my family, to special friends, and signed it, of course, for us. They have it up in their living room.
Other than family, how were you received by the general public?
Oh, my father had already passed away. My mother was waiting to get remarried until I could give her away. So I got home on November 4. November 6th was my birthday, and my mother got married the next day, and I gave her away. And she married a former rancher named Gilbert Reidinger. And I said, "What in the world did you see at Gilbert?" He was that's all German country there, German immigrants, and he was a German, and he raised cattle and such. And towards the end of his property, he made it into a dairy farm, so he had dairy cattle. And then the state of Texas wanted to build a highway right through the middle of his property, so they bought it from him. He bought another ranch outside of a little town called Floresville on the other side of San Antonio, where my sisters did these days, where they lived until both of them passed away. But I didn't fly any combat missions that second time around. I came home. No one called me baby killer or anything like that. I was wearing a uniform in the terminal as I was coming and as I was going. A sweet story is I was waiting to come home. I went over and I bought a standby ticket. That was all I could afford to come back from I say San Francisco. It was one of the no, it was SeaTac. It was SeaTac. It was SeaTac. I was at SeaTac, and so I changed clothes into my greens that I had been hanging in for a year in Vietnam, and the men's room, and bought a ticket, and so I was waiting for the flight, and so they called the flight, and everybody starts moving up to the airplane, and so I talked with the gate attendant, and so looks like everybody's on board. I hope there's a seat. So she came over and she said, Captain, I have some good news and some bad news. I said, well, what's the bad news? And she said, well, the bad news is we're loaded. We're fully loaded. We don't have any empty seats for your standby. And I said, hey, I've waited a year. I could wait a few more hours. And he said, no, good news. They have one seat open in the first class. We want you to take it. And it brought tears to my eyes, I have to admit. And so they put me in a first class seat. TV, steaks, glass of wine, music. Flew into Burbank. And end of my story.
That's
I would do it again. I would go to Ukraine if I could.
yeah.
I would do it because I believe in what they're fighting for and what I fought for, and there's always better wars and worse wars and good ideas and bad ideas, and we did them all. We did them all, and I've been back to Vietnam twice on vacation. I went back in 2006 with a bunch of vets. I went back again in 2018 with a single vet, just the two of us, a custom tour we could afford it. We stayed in 5-star hotels in Hanoi, in Hoi An, in Da Nang, and in Saigon. We lived the life of Riley. I mean, it's true. It did it on purpose. He asked, I don't know him. I don't know the man that I went with for a couple of months or so, but I asked my group that I belonged to, my PTSD, does anybody want to go back to Vietnam? I'm going to go. He's the only one that said, I'll go with you. You're welcome. Well, he and I got our passports together. He was the best traveling companion I could have chosen. I would do it again in an instant. Anytime he wants to go someplace, I'm with him. But he's got a girlfriend now, so that puts me out. But and I've got a wife. I didn't have her. I called her from Taiwan. Was it? I called you long distance.
It was far away.
Yeah, I think it was from Taiwan. I'm changing airplanes. I called from Taiwan. But I went back in 2006 and again, and that was 2006 that I called her. Then I went again in 2018, a luxury tour. We were in an SUV. We had our own SUV. We had a driver. We had a knowledgeable guide for each of the city guides. And I've asked myself, I don't know how many times, and people have asked me, why would you go back to Vietnam? And I guess the reason was I loved that country. I saw it the way few people could see it. I saw it from the air. The rice paddies, the light off of them, the little dikes, the little paths, the jungle, the most beautiful jungles, the monkeys in the jungles, this tiger one time, Bengal tiger. I saw the most incredible mountains. I literally fought in the mountains. I shot in the mountains. I killed in the mountains. I loved the mountains. They were just so beautiful. The jungles, I could hide behind a tree. It was easy. And it taught me that thing about looking for the two trees. So, yeah. I went back to find out if 58,000 Americans, was it worth it? And Lord knows I'm not able to judge whether we were worth it or not. But I know the people in South Vietnam today are open-minded, are freewheeling. You can buy anything you want anywhere in Vietnam with a credit card, and they have a laptop computer, and they'll get approval for what you want to buy from your bank while you're standing there. That's amazing, amazing to me. And I see the difference between the North and the South. The people in the North are very reserved. they just give you the impression that their elbows are into their sides and their hands are clasped across their chest. And they're riding motor scooters and bicycles like crazy. And you get into Da Nang and then in the southern part of Vietnam, they're driving cars. They're driving cars. They're laughing. They have clubs. They have Western style stores. I don't know how I lost a charge cord for one of my batteries, and I went down to the desk and I asked, is there someplace I can get this kind of a cord that doesn't have this kind of a connector? They grabbed one of the guys, gave him the cord that works, that belonged to my friend. He took off running down the street, came back with the right cord, and gave me back my friend's cord. No charge. No, can I give him it? No, don't give him anything. All right, that's what I'm supposed to do. Good food. They had incredible buffets. Every kind of fruit that you had never seen before in your entire life. I mean, what kind of star food? What the hell is star food? I mean, so many different kinds of tropical foods that we never had. I got a little loose stomach on one day back in 2006 when I was there, and so what my solution was, at breakfast, I got a stalk of those little bananas. I don't know if you've ever had it. If you ever see them in the store here, they're about that long. They're about that long and they're about that big around. And they are, I got a little stalk of them. And that's what I ate that day. And the next day I was fine. So I don't know if it was the bananas or if it was me. But they were sure good. I'll tell you that much.
Well, what message would you like to send people who view your video in the future?
I think the only thing I could say is that you got to look for the good in life. Whatever you decide is the good, that's what you have to pursue. If your good is the sovereignty of your nation, you got to keep it up. If your good is going to Canada and not fighting, then you're a jerk. You deserve anything you get or don't get. I didn't have a relative, cousins on my wife's side. Not one of them went to Canada to avoid the draft. I was in Vietnam when the draft was stopped, and that would have been, I guess, second tour, still in the 70s, maybe 72. I'm guessing, but probably close to 72. And all of a sudden, we had troops that had not been drafted. And you know, I was never drafted. I volunteered everything. I was recently in my men's group at the vet center in Ventura, and under this pandemic stuff, we had to meet eventually in the park, face to face, but with masks and 6 feet. And we met in an outdoor environment in the park. And I asked, I don't remember who asked, maybe I asked, I said, I heard a lot about people being angry. Is anybody here angry? I mean, because I've listened to all of these guys talk about their stories. And there was one of the fellows that was Navy that had been a brown water Navy, and he had some experiences. I don't know how they did that in their business, but he's in the brown water Navy, and he's he and his wife both makeup artists in Hollywood, asked for by celebrities. He's retired now. about my age. And he was one of the guys that raised his hand. There were three of them that raised their hand. I mean, and so our liaison, a woman trained, she's trained in therapy, called on each one of them, what are you angry about? They didn't know. They didn't know. My assumption is that they were drafted. I asked them, were you guys drafted or? Oh no, we were drafted. There's where the anger comes. You know, they were standing on a street corner someplace, planning to go to college, and they were going to study this, or they were going to get married this, and all of a sudden, Uncle says, "No, you come, yeah, you're going to Vietnam, young man," and 58,000 killed in Vietnam. And a lot were captured, mostly pilots, and I was very active in Thousand Oaks. I was Mr. Veteran in Thousand Oaks. If there was something hot flash came out of D.C. about veterans, I was the one the newspaper called. I was the one that they called when Jane Fonda was going to say she was sorry that she set on the anti-aircraft gun and stuff like that. They called me one, and it's my ex-wife was helping me in the studio. She answered the telephone, and in the back room, and I was doing something. She said, "The newspaper is on the phone, and they want to know what you think about Jane Fonda saying she was sorry." And so as I'm walking back, she said, "Who cares what you think about Jane Fonda?" And I said, "Well, I sure sound hungry." Anyway, I told them what I thought about Jane Fonda. But I supported the POW MIA to the extent that I can. I went to Washington, D.C. with some of my group, and I talked to the representatives in the Pentagon that were looking for those POW MIAs. They would call me on the telephone long distance. It's called from Laotian, Thailand, and Vietnam. Yeah, what can I do for you? You know, I want you to know that we are indeed doing black. You're not to say a word to, but we do have some black ops going a couple of times. I was very active in the POW-MIA, the Black Flag. I knew parents. We have a parent here that I was interested in calling her to sit in on this. She's a Gold Star mother. I presume you guys know the Gold Star mothers, where I had to learn years ago. But the only kind of grouping that I do for the community these days, and I used to do Veterans Day and Memorial Day every day at Pierce Brothers Valley Oaks and Westlake. I can't do that anymore. I mean, I passed it along to someone else to take over long ago. But I was approached, and I do one thing. It's called Wreaths Across America, and I ask anybody who sees this, Christmas wreaths across America. We put a fresh wreath with a red bow on every veteran's headstone at our local cemetery. 3,400 different cemeteries participating this last year. And my guess is more this year. It's only in December. It's the second or the third Saturday in December. I like it when it's the third Saturday because the city of Camarillo has a Christmas parade on the second. And so it's hard to get the scouts to come out to my place if they just doing that. So at 11 o'clock on December 17th this year, we'll be at Conejo Mountain Cemetery. And we need wreaths. We need more wreaths. We get about 500 wreaths that are donated. The price has gone up surprisingly from $15 a wreath to $17 a wreath. And they get donated and purchased throughout the year, and they're delivered fresh the week before they're going to be put out. And I've done that since 2016. And because of some health issues that I had recently, one of my biggest supporters, I have a number of big supporters that would give me $1,000. All I had to do was call. Said, Maurice, can you give me 1,000? Who will make the check out to? I'll tell them that I don't get anything from it. I'm not paid. Everybody involved is volunteer.
Sir, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up.
It'll happen again this year at 11 o'clock on December 17th. We'd like to see you come.
Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much. You have an amazing story, and I'm just honored that we'll be able to have this in the Library of Congress. We had,
You know, Ed, you've done so many of these. To hear you say things like that. I was a photographer, and I photographed a couple of these sessions years ago at the Reagan Library, and you were doing it then.
Yeah.
You were doing it then, and I spoke with you briefly on the telephone about something. But when she said your videographer was going to be Ed Lynch, I said, I know Ed. Yeah, he's going to be there.
Thank you, sir.